The Monsterverse as a film franchise has lasted longer than most. Beginning unofficially in 2014 with a simple Godzilla movie that was eventually built off of into becoming the big kaiju-themed cinematic universe that it is today, a universe where monsters are real. Well, I mean, they're real in our world too, just more David Zaslav shaped. But in this world, they take the form of titans. The universe crossed its 10th anniversary last year, and to mark the occasion, began with the 5th official film in its continuity. But on top of that, we also got something else. You see, for a universe as focused on films as the Monsterverse, it has also made a concerted effort to expand itself outward into more mediums, such as comic books, television, both live action and animated, and lastly, and most recently, a video game. I mean, technically crappy mobile games and tie-ins have existed for a while with the Monsterverse, but 2024 gave us the very first of a whole new breed. A fully original video game made from the ground up to be set within the Monsterverse continuity, making this as official an entry into that universe as the films and shows before it. So, how did it go down? What was the story of the very first Monsterverse video game, and most importantly, did it stick the landing? Well, that's what I hope to find out today in my retrospective look back on Kong: Survivor Instinct. The Monsterverse has long existed as a film franchise. I won't be covering all of its history in film and television in this video, that's another story for another time, but I will be covering its history in the world of Mountain Dew and Dorito Dust. The very first instance of the Monsterverse in the world of gaming came in 2014, with a total of 3 tie-in games to the Gareth Edwards Godzilla flick, all of which released within a month of each other, and all of which were meant as very low-budget mobile or web games. The first of these games was Godzilla Crisis Defense, released in May of 2014. This game was a very simple web game that had players manage limited resources in order to deal with emergencies sprouting up around the city as a result of Godzilla's rampage. The game spliced in clips from the upcoming film in between static shots of the city in order to achieve this effect. But otherwise, there really isn't much else to add. Next, released only a week later, was a mobile game entitled Godzilla Strike Zone, a rudimentary first-person shooter with one of the least flattering trailers I've ever seen, transitioning from the live-action footage of the film to, oof. The game consisted of 4 levels in which you play as a soldier to rescue civilians, although for some reason only 3 levels were present at launch, with them going out of their way to add in a 4th level a couple of weeks later. Not really sure why they bothered, but neat, I guess. I will say, for a crappy mobile tie-in game that was probably made in a week by a group of underpaid interns high on Xanax, this game does try to do more than I would have initially expected. Not only considering the FPS gameplay, but various other vignettes such as the first stage, which adapts the iconic Halo jump scene. From here on, though, it is about exactly what you'd expect. You spend most of the experience just walking from point A to point B, only ever using your gun to shoot at environmental objects as there are no actual enemies to fight. Each level does end in a chase sequence where you run away from Godzilla, but I'm kind of left to wonder what was even the point of this. It definitely feels like it was meant to be something more, but they had to rush it out the door at the last second, hence why the gun is effectively useless and why the 4th level was added after launch. Finally, for 2014, and only a day after the initial launch of Strike Zone, came the release of the final mobile tie-in game to 2014's Godzilla, Godzilla Smash 3. It's a match 3 game. Enough said. Needless to say, each of these games was fairly cheap, and clearly just made as a bit of cross-promotion for the film, all being super short and all no longer being available to download and or play nowadays. I will admit, though, I am somewhat intrigued by the potential a game like Strike Force might have had it have had more time to cook, and given the reign to be something more than a crappy half-adaptation of the film upon which it was based. That being said, it did lay the groundwork of what we can expect, right? Some half-assed mobile games to tie into 7 years later. Yeah, they kinda gave up after that. Because for the next 2 films, no kind of game content was ever produced. Both Kong Skull Island and Godzilla King of the Monsters passes by with 0 crappy tie-in games. Unless you count the Monarch Science's website ARG created for King of the Monsters as a game, but I don't. That being said, in the build-up to Godzilla vs. Kong in 2021, we would get some new content, but not in the form of new tie-in games, but rather tie-ins and collaborations to existing games. In 2021, we got Godzilla vs. Kong content in PUBG Mobile, World of Warships, and Godzilla Battle Line, all of which were pre-existing mobile games that had content added to them, usually including legendary Godzilla and Kong in some way. The following year, Godzilla and Kong content was added into Call of Duty Warzone, which was the most in-depth Monsterverse content so far. From my understanding, Warzone is basically Fortnite, but with a Call of Duty coat of paint. But for this update, they made it so that Kong and Godzilla both spawn into the map along with the players, essentially acting as extra obstacles during the match. Truthfully, it doesn't look like they actually do all that much, but it's cool, and even gave us our first tease at some stuff from the at the time upcoming Godzilla x Kong, which was super cool to see. After this series of tie-ins, there would be more silence in 2023, with 2024 providing a Roblox obby that let players watch the GXK trailer. Not really sure what the point of this is, but I guess it's better use of those players' time than the online gambling casino maps, so pop off, I guess. And then, I guess also worth noting, as while working on this video, even though it came out after the game we're talking about today, Godzilla and Kong were both added to Fortnite. Mainly as skins, although I think Godzilla can appear in the overworld in the Fortnite game mode. I don't really know, I don't play Fortnite, yeah, I'm a fake gamer like that. Of course, one other notable entry in the Monsterverse gaming canon would release in 2024. Notable because it's the game this entire video was made for. That's right, folks, we finally arrived at the point. Kong Survivor Instinct was developed by the studio 7 Levels, who first revealed back in 2022 that they'd been partnering with Legendary on their first PC and home console Monsterverse game. And in April of 2024, the game would be officially confirmed by Legendary under the title of Kong Titan Echoes. Yeah, although come its full official reveal later in August, the name would be updated to Survivor Instinct. The game was confirmed to be set shortly after the events of Godzilla vs. Kong, and that the game would follow a father searching for his lost daughter through the wreckage and left in wake of Kong and Godzilla's battle. The game was confirmed for all current-gen consoles and Steam, and 7 Levels posted this cryptic teaser before then dropping the first and final trailer only a day later. The trailer showed off some simple cinematics and footage of the gameplay, revealing it to be a 2.5D side-scrolling game with metroidvania elements set during what appears to be yet another Titan rampage, this time seemingly from Kong. 2 months later, the game would launch in full on October 22nd, 2024. The plot of this game is simple, but sets the stage for what could be a very interesting story that stays true to the grounded human element this entire game is built around. We follow David, a father who, upon learning about a Titan attack in the city, rushes in to try and save his daughter, who is trapped in the city. From here, he rushes to his car and speeds down the road, but distracted by the looming figure of Kong in the distance, he accidentally crashes his car and is forced to make the rest of the way on foot. From here, after a bit of wandering around and getting accustomed to the controls, you'll come across this.
I'm afraid the road's blocked, sir.
Afraid you'll scratch the car? How thoughtful. But you're not getting paid to think, are you? The orders were to deliver it to the bay ASAP. We don't have time for detours. There's a goddamn giant ape on the loose.
From here, you'll gain access to the Orca device, first seen in Godzilla King of the Monsters. This device allows you to recreate the roars of various titans in order to attract the attention of specific monsters, which for this game is largely just used to set up various checkpoints you have to visit before you can open up an area by calling a titan to clear away rubble in your path. While inconsistent to how the Orca device is handled in the films, it does make sense to change it up for a game, and gives us some cool cutscenes with the various monsters that you tracked with it. That said, gaining this device also leads to a particular downside in that the armed goons we saw carrying it earlier were part of a larger organization that now want it back. David reads an info module on the device about Alan Jonah, another name that will be familiar to those of you who watched King of the Monsters, as he was the human villain who led the eco-terrorists in that film. While the end credit scene to that film served to entirely set up his involvement in the sequel, Godzilla vs. Kong, during Warner Bros. Butchering of that film's original plan, he was entirely cut out, as were many other references to King of the Monsters, leaving Alan Jonah a loose plot thread in the Monsterverse. So seeing him pop up again in this game is nice, even if he sounds nothing like Charles Dance who portrayed him in that film. From here, you will consistently be attacked by hyena goons who are searching to get the device back, And rather than just giving it to them so that you can continue your primary objective of finding your daughter, David instead chooses violence, and to fight all of these armed and likely heavily trained thugs entirely by himself for seemingly no other reason than spite.
Easy. I don't want any trouble. You could have left me alone.
After murdering several armed guards on your way through the desolated city,
Why are you all so stubborn?
you will discover a log that recounts Alan having stolen the Orca device from Monarch. And not long after that, you will eventually come across this building where you will come face to face with Kong. And almost immediately he will attempt to squash you, leading to the first of several Titan chase sequences in the game. After narrowly avoiding him, you will stumble off and David can find a TV recording where a Monarch scientist cites eyewitnesses as saying that Kong appears to be searching for something, and is angry that he cannot find it. After this, you will eventually collect enough samples to use the Orca for the first time to lure Kong over to destroy a building and clear a path forward. Eventually, David makes his way to Stacy's apartment only to find it empty. It seems she hasn't been home in some time, and while looking through her apartment, he finds evidence of a vet hospital that she works at and decides to visit there next. After this, we enter the downtown area of the city. From here, we find the city caked in these thick webs and crawling with what are known as plague weavers. We encounter a Monarch scientist but decline to evacuate with her, and eventually come face to leg with Abaddon, the face of this new game, who frankly isn't in it that much considering he's on all the pre-release marketing. It's a little disappointing. Eventually, we reach the hospital only to find that it's a front for the hyenas, leading David to wonder if Stacy is working for them. We then encounter a scientist who tells us that they aren't responsible for the Titan attack, but before she can give us any more concrete leads, she's webbed up and taken by Abaddon. With no other leads, we resolve to find her. After an encounter with Abaddon attempting to destroy us in the building, we find the doctor again. However, while she begs for us to help her, we instead insist she tells us where Stacy is. She tells us to take the sewers and give us a key card, but is then once again carried off by Abaddon and presumably killed. We get some Monarch logs as well around this time that establish that Abaddon was the last Titan to arrive and seems to be preparing the city as a battleground against Kong. We make our way forward and are prepared to enter the sewers before Abaddon finds us. He jabs a leg down at us, opening up a path, but before he can kill us, Kong appears and punches Abaddon in the face. We escape into the underground base and encounter our first Skull Spawn, who effectively just replaced the Plague Weavers from before as fodder monsters that attack us. We then encounter Jonah face to face. We learn that Tiamat, a Titan from Godzilla x Kong in a prior comic, is apparently entering the Bay Area, and that is where you need to go. As this conversation with Jonah effectively confirms that Stacy is working for them. We pistol whip him and steal a car to make our way down to the bay. Oh yeah, and by the way, yeah, Abaddon, he's gone now. Yeah, main face of the pre-market, he's just gone now. Pretty sure he died off screen, so that's fun. Upon arriving at the bay, we discover it to be covered in this fluorescent pink goo that we eventually find out is the result of Tiamat's influence. Eventually, we find and save a woman who had been tied up by hyena soldiers, and she gives us this grappling hook that will assist us in navigating the rest of the game. After finding a research log on Tiamat, we also learn that Tiamat can mimic the calls of other Titans. Do you ever say a word enough and it just loses all meaning? I mean, Tiamat. I'm not even aware it's the name, but it's Tiamat. Leading David to believe that she is the reason Kong might be here. We also learn that Hyena is planning to battle Tiamat, but before that can happen, she attacks us instead. Eventually, we are saved by fighter jets distracting her, allowing us to get away. As we continue, we reach a point where we need Kong's help again to reach a certain area. We call him, and to David's shock, Kong extends a hand and peacefully carries David where he needs to go. He seemed pretty happy to smash us to pulp earlier, but alright, not gonna complain about this, I guess. Eventually, we reach the Great Bridge. We call Kong to help clear a path, but while he's doing that, Tiamat attacks. While Tiamat and Kong's battle destroys the bridge behind us, we must dodge and weave through the chaos to escape alive. Eventually, we reach an elevator, which descends and takes us into the Hyena base. From here, we lose access to all of our items, save for Jonah's keycard, which grants us access to the base. Eventually, we find a room with a new Titan kept in a giant oversized fishbowl, kind of. One that looks similar to Tiamat. Lahamu, another brand new Titan. We learn they have been bioengineering Lahamu and selling her secretion on the black market. Gamer girl bathwater, it's gamer girl bathwater. As we are exploring through, we are jumped by Jonah and two armed guards. With no way to fight back, we make a run for it, and thankfully the guards kindly decide not to shoot us as we rather slowly make our escape.
Thief! Let's pin him down!
You had him right there. Can anyone explain to me what happened?
I mean, I'm sure the alarm helped, but still, those two are pretty shite guards. From here, we re-enter Lahamu's room, where she suddenly headbutts the glass, cracking it. Then, over the intercom, we hear Stacy. She pleads for us to leave and that she is here of her own volition, willingly to help care for Lahamu, and that she had set off the prior alarm that helped us escape. Finally, we end up in a room with Stacy and Jonah. Stacy tries to give us a way out of getting shot by, offering us to join the hyenas. But David rejects this. As Jonah's about to shoot us, because I guess we just, couldn't at least pretend we were interested in joining his cult so we didn't die, Stacy takes the orca and uses it to make Lahamu escape her containment, causing the base to flood. Jonah and his cronies make a run for it, leaving David and Stacy alone to get washed away by the water. In the ending, we see Tiamat and Lahamu swimming away together as David and Stacy both wash ashore outside of the wrecked city. They appear to be dead until we see Stacy's fingers twitch as the game ends. So, rip Bozo David, I guess. But you know what isn't very rip Bozo? Who the fuck wrote this? My brand new side channel, WILLJEUM TV. I'll be uploading new animations as well as new skits and show-based content over there, so if that sounds of interest, check it out. Starting on March 15th, I'll be releasing a brand new mini Liposode entitled Lippo and the Quinquennial Conundrum, try saying that 5 times fast, to celebrate the 5th anniversary of the Lippo series. This isn't the next big Lippo I'm working on, but it is still a new one. So, check it out, subscribe, like, you want to. Please. With the earliest pitch for this game being a Monsterverse metroidvania set from the human perspective during a kaiju attack, I couldn't have been more hooked. This is quite literally my dream game in its premise. Imagine the possibilities of fluid motion, quick and snappy controls, and a sense of gaining continuous upgrades, and all the while dodging atomic blasts and hairy fists. Well, let's see how it fares. Starting off, the game is presented as a 2D side-scrolling affair, much to be expected of a game sharing DNA with the titular Metroid and Castlevania games from which this genre gains its namesake. You play as an average, everyday man, so your moveset is limited, to say the least. Your running is adequate, and your jumps short. You've got no special moves like wall jumping or double jumping, so you're entirely at the mercy of the world. You don't even have a way to defend yourself, or at least, not yet, given another famous element of Metroidvanias is them slowly building up your arsenal of attacks and moves until you're practically unstoppable. I went in expecting some big change-ups to how we traverse the map. Given the game is pretty clearly grounding itself more in the Gareth Edwards half of the Monsterverse, though, I didn't expect it to be shine-sparking about. But some small movement upgrades would be welcome too, I thought. That said, I'm afraid to disappoint now that beyond a couple pieces of gear you obtain, very little of it actually affects how you interact with the world outside of specifically designed obstacles. Your base moveset you have at the beginning of the game is roughly the same moveset you have at the end, which means you're stuck with slow, clunky turning, a pitifully unreliable jump to deal with hazards and pits, and a borderline annoying lack of a sprint button, which means you're left with a spare few options throughout the whole runtime. Notably, simple movements like running, jumping, crouching, and sliding under certain obstacles while moving. You can also grab onto ledges above you, and if you hang over an edge, you can send yourself jumping farther to the opposite end in an attempt to grab onto an opposing ledge, if there is one to reach. That said, you better hope there is, as if you fall more than 2 stories, the screen will fade to black, kicking you back to your previous position and taking away a slot of health. The upgrades you do get come in a couple forms. First are the simple things like health pickups or ammo increasing magazines, both of which increase your limit on either resource. You will also find specific gear, such as a crowbar which aids you in melee combat, a gun which assists in long distance combat as well as the occasional puzzle, and most interestingly, a grappling hook. This hook isn't very useful in combat, but it makes up for that by allowing you to grapple onto any metal hooks you find in the overworld. This allows you to climb certain areas, swing over long ledges, and pull certain objects such as crates or explosive barrels towards you. Given the hook can only be used in certain areas, it doesn't do much to add to your base moveset, and, in fact, I often found myself more annoyed when I had to use it due to how much it can slow down gameplay. David climbs at a snail's pace of this thing, and other actions such as swinging or even throwing it in the first place aren't much better. And there are many points in time-sensitive chases where I would die because the hook's reticle would refuse to grapple onto the desired point in time for the slow throwing animation to actually engage it. On top of this, Failing to hit a hook results in yet another costly animation of him reeling it back in before you can try again. That will result in you getting smashed during most Titan encounters at least once. But before we start talking about those, we should probably start from the basics. We've covered the moveset, but what is the core gameplay loop you'll be going through with it? Well, the majority of the game is, as you might expect, focused on traversing the landscape and solving puzzles. Albeit it can get a bit generous to call some of these puzzles, as most of the time simply following the path forward will reward you with various items you need to progress, such as gears or keys, which can be used to fix electrical equipment and open doors respectively. The other common types of roadblocks come in the form of electrical puzzles, which this game loves. Hazardous hanging wires on timed electrical shocking patterns and batteries that must be unplugged and replugged in order to open new paths. You'll also encounter main obstacles in the form of scorched stripes that burn you upon touching them, or these venomous purple goop piles that will deal damage and small knockback to you. These are easy enough to avoid as long as your jump decides to be nice and actually clear the obstacle, but given how short your jump is, it means you need to be pretty specific with it to execute this properly, which will result in a lot of
Another one! Ugh! What the hell?
That said, while the core gameplay here does sound like it fits in with the expectations of a Metroidvania, there's one notable thing it's lacking, and it's letting you get lost in these environments. This game is incredibly linear, to a degree where you will always know exactly where to go and what to do. It's actually quite rare to revisit previously explored areas, as there are very few items you gain that change your moveset in any significant way. As such, backtracking would be just that, backtracking. So instead, the game keeps you funneled moving forward. I mean, hell, they even have a tracker on your map so you always know where you need to go. This does at least reduce a lot of headache on picking the game back up between breaks, especially if you take a few days off in between like I did. That said, the length of the game means you shouldn't need to worry about that as much, as I ended up beating the game in about 2 sessions across a total of 8 hours, and some people have beat it in as little as 6 in one session, so the nicety of it being easy to pick up isn't as rewarding as it might have been on a longer experience where this is more likely to occur. But with the gameplay loop out of the way, what about the little bits in between to break up the monotony? Specifically, what about the combat? Well, my friends, it is my pleasure to announce that I have finally found a combat system so bad, it makes my previous holder of the worst, Bendy and the Ink Machine, look like an innocent darling angel in comparison, because the combat system in this game isn't just bad. Oh no, it's actively painful, miserable, and all around a significant detriment to the game, because boy, this shit ass. Combat in this game results in you being set up against a collection of enemies, usually somewhere between 2 to 4 at a time. From the moment you encounter enemies in these set enemy zones, your controls will shift to that of combat mode, taking away your jumps in favor of the ability to dodge, counter, and dash, all of which sound like good and useful elements to have in a combat system, especially one that only gives you 2 dimensions to work with. The issue is that as the game progresses, you will continuously find yourself surrounded by enemies, specifically enemies holding gear such as melee weapons, heavy-duty shields, and guns. Most games like this will function on a system that prevents all of the enemies from attacking you at once. That way you actually have time to react to the attacks from your opponents before you get wailed on. This is a mechanic trailing as far back as games like Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64, so, you know, pretty well established. And to an extent, I suppose that does happen here, as since gunman enemies can actually hurt their own teammates, their teammates will always duck down to prevent getting hit, thusly meaning they can't attack you simultaneously to the gunners, which is good. What isn't good is when you find yourself surrounded by 2 or more shielded enemies, as then, all bets are off. You can't pass through enemies when they surround you, so if they crowd you like this and both begin wailing on you, you won't be able to counter both, and are guaranteed to get hit. The countering itself is finicky at best, and there are so many times I swear to God I've pressed the counter button at the time of the flash, and instead of it working, I'll find my skull caved in by a 9-iron. On top of this, enemies will crowd you, preventing you from dodging attacks, and because your attacks will automatically lock into the nearest enemy, you might find yourself swinging about randomly and not at the enemy you're actually trying to focus on. You can try to grab an enemy and throw them behind you to get out of the middle, but this leaves you wide open to an attack from behind that will almost surely find you, causing you to stutter just enough for the guy you were trying to throw to also get a hit in on you, effectively making your only chance at escape in the scenario a death sentence. Because your abilities to dodge and escape the attacks are cut off, all you can really do is spam your attack button. That won't work either, as the enemy will just flawlessly block your attack, and then the 2 of them will beat the ever-loving crap out of you until you die and are sent all the way back to the previous checkpoint, which, if you're lucky, will be close by. But if you aren't, woohoo! This game loves throwing random combat encounters right before a save after a long stretch of gameplay, meaning you will be walking along long stretches you've already cleared just to get back to a combat fight you're probably going to unfairly lose again anyway. Isn't that fun? Thankfully, this scenario is at least fairly rare, and largely only happens near the ending of the game when you have obtained enough ammo backstock to just start shooting all enemies on sight with a headshot so that you don't actually have to deal with them. Legitimately the best strategy for dealing with the harder encounters. To make it all worse, every single combat encounter in the game is like this. There are only 3 enemy types, those being the melee with a shield, and gunners, and by the latter half of the game, the setup will almost always be identical with a riot shield and gunner on either side. These encounters aren't just controller-smashingly infuriating, they're also a test in patience for how dull and repetitive they are. Add in the annoying reused dialogue for the enemies, and it all comes together to make my least favorite combat system I've ever had the displeasure of covering for a video so far. That said, there's one more encounter I've yet to cover, and that is the Titan chases. At various points in the game, you'll find yourself in scripted chase sequences, where you are on the run from various raging titans such as Kong, Abaddon, Tiamat, and so on. Each of these encounters plays out with largely the same few elements. Your path will open up before you as the building you are in is destroyed. The Titan will be actively trying to destroy you or the building you're in, meaning you have to avoid fists, spider legs, and goopy purple dragon breath, all the while making sure to never miss a jump. These encounters are really exciting when you first play them, with bombastic music hyping you up and really well-animated attacks from the titans in question. The issue comes into play when you die, and are sent back to the beginning of the sequence over, and over, and over. These sequences are largely meant to be played once, but as you go on, the timing between jumps gets stricter and stricter, and once things like your grappling hook or gun are brought into account, it gets so much worse. You cannot properly aim either of these while running, forcing you to slow down and fiddle with the game's lackluster aiming system, particularly with a controller, which the game recommends you use. Using the right stick, you have to pray that the item you're aiming actually decides to lock onto the object. You need to hit in time, or else you'll find yourself squashed to a fine pulp and forced to restart the entire sequence, which, towards the end of the game, can get very long. In particular, the Abaddon sequence in the final battle between Kong and Tiamat both took me way more tries than they should have, due to the game just refusing to let me grapple onto the correct points, or responding to my attempts to jump in a certain direction. By the 50th time you are retrying these, they lose all of their wow factor and just become exercises in patience. Much like being forced to replay the combat encounters ad nauseum, but where those at least send you back to a checkpoint that is hopefully nearby, so that you can at least take a break to breathe, these start you right back at the beginning of the action. Less backtracking, sure, but they couldn't have autosaved right before the trigger, because now you're stuck in a constant loop, unable to take a break or rest while you desperately bash your skull against a brick wall. It's sequences like this that make me realize this game isn't really meant to be played, it's meant to be watched in highlight reels online. Looking at a single long play of each sequence is exciting and fun, but actually playing it on loop over and over and over makes you want to lobotomize yourself with a rusty spoon. That said, this all about covers the gameplay. At its best, it can be a chill experience that you can turn your brain off to and autoplay through the overworld sections. Perfect for appreciating the beautiful landscapes behind you. But at its worst, it will brutalize you with unfair and annoying combat encounters and dazzling, albeit frustrating, Titan encounters. The gameplay is a mixed bag, but unfortunately, despite the promise the premise held, I found myself leaning more in the negative category with it. I do appreciate what was being attempted here, and it never feels lazy. I can tell there were genuine attempts to create a fun experience, but the gameplay in general did leave quite a bit to be desired. That said, taking note of something I mentioned earlier is that while the gameplay itself may be a bit naff, one thing that isn't is the backgrounds, and along with them, 7 Levels isn't a major gaming studio like Ubisoft or Activision, and as such, their games are subsequent to much less scrutiny when it comes to the general visual polish on display. They aren't shoveling billions of dollars into this shit after all. It's a fairly small budget game, all things considered. That being said, the visuals and audio on presentation can still be vital to a game's success at engrossing the player, and as such, it's still important to the overall experience. With 7 Levels being essentially an indie studio, one might expect them to aim for a more stylistic approach to the art style, rather than a hyper-realistic one. as that can often be easier for smaller teams to produce and oftentimes looks much better as well. But 7 Levels made the bold choice to attempt graphics that more closely matched the cinematic counterparts to the game, with the game opting for a style that closely resembles the graphics you might expect from a more realistic title. As mentioned before, this can be a rather risky gamble for smaller studios, but honestly, I think the game manages to pull it off, at least for most of its runtime. The realistic visuals do serve to further establish the game in the rather grounded part of the Monsterverse, which is fitting, as rather than playing as the Titans, we instead play as the humans from the ground level, looking up in awe and often terror at these Titans. This approach is also helped by the game's pulled-out camera, helping to make us feel small in the wake of this groaning, massive city. This helps to also mask some of the imperfections in the visuals that would otherwise be put on full display, had the camera been closer. That said, I can't sit here and call this the prettiest game ever made. Like I said, it does have its imperfections, particularly on Kong himself whenever we see him up close during a Titan encounter scene or cutscene. The matted fur has proved hard to pull off in many video game scenarios, and sadly this one is no different. But the game knows its limits and works around them well. It also knows when to rely on its strong points, which for me is these grand sweeping backgrounds. The sky always perfectly suits the mood of the area you are in, and the massive cityscapes present just behind you always look impressive. Everything is well modeled and looks like an actual lived-in location, which is exactly what you want when we're traversing through city ruins fresh off of a kaiju rampage. Each location, despite sharing its overall city theming, still manages to stick in the head. The cold nighttime approach to the eerily empty hospitals or the dying sun over the main opening sector. The usage of this day-night cycle goes a long way to actually depict the journey your character is going on and adds so much character to each encounter. Plus, it makes for even prettier backgrounds. This game at its best is visual eye candy. That said, there's one other notable point where the game looks a little awkward, and that's during the cutscenes. Character animations are often wonky and have this rigid edge to them, with overly exaggerated movements that don't quite match the tone the game is often setting in these scenes. That said, even when the animation is wonky, the 2 cinematic cutscenes that play at the very beginning and ending of the game are certainly nothing to scoff at in a visual level. So all in all, they are sort of a mixed bag, but definitely leaning more positive. That said, this one main shot of the character grabbing a water bottle while epic music plays in the background was really funny. Of course, when it comes to presentation, visuals are only one side of the coin. On the other is the equally important but oft forgot about audio, be it sound design, music, or perhaps most intriguingly in this game's case, voice acting. Yeah, gonna rip that band-aid off now. The voicing in this game is,
Hey, Stace, it's Dad. Right, you know it's Dad. Stay put. I'm coming to get you. Be brave. I'll be there in no time. Just hold on, Pumpkin.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, it does improve, at least for the main character. You almost get to see the VA of our main man improve over the course of the game, which is neat to see, but the other NPCs and reused voice clips do leave a bit to be desired. Oh yeah, that's another thing. This game loves reusing the same handful of lines every time you kill an enemy, be it a human enemy.
If this is what it takes, I'm not backing away. You could have left me alone. Why are you all so stubborn? There has to be another way. You made me do that.
Hey, you! Give it back, now! That thing belongs to us, and I'm taking it back!
There has to be another way.
That thing belongs to us!
Why are you all so stubborn?
Give it back!
There has to be another way.
Give it back!
I'm not backing away. Why are you all so
Give it back!
Or these baby skull crawlers you'll be encountering.
I was never fond of spiders.
You'll also be treated to a variety of overplayed, generic, and very annoying dialogue that will make you want to consider shutting the game audio off entirely. But hey, maybe the other 2 elements are better? Well, I mean, they aren't worse, but yeah. The sound design is fine, but never stood out to me. That said, it never actively annoyed me either, so I guess that's a good thing. The best part of this is the ambience that does work in tandem with the background music to set the mood, something it does do well. But you aren't going to believe this game humming any of the themes and tunes that you hear throughout. That said, credit where credit's due, the final boss theme that blares near the end is really exciting, even if the scene itself is, well, a Titan encounter. For now, I can give the visuals a high score, the ambience and music a decent enough score, and the voice acting one of those big golden stickers that says A for effort. Given this game is once again fairly small budget and made by a small studio, I don't think it's fair to hold the lack of professional voice actors against it, but it's still a noticeable gripe I have with the game at some parts all the same. A staple of any Metroidvania is the upgrades and secrets you can discover by exploring the world. However, as discussed before, the only real upgrades you'll find here are health upgrades in water bottles and ammo upgrades in magazines. These are also quite spread out, and as such the game needed something else with which to populate its world. Thankfully, it's set within a massive expanded universe, which meant there could only really be one solution: lore. Pretty sure I heard a FNAF fan in the audience explode when I said that. God, this word has become so tainted. As you explore the city, you'll occasionally find various text files, broadcasts, or Monarch files as you reach certain story beats. The lore bites offered by these vary, with Monarch files detailing specific titans, broadcasts being recordings such as news clips, and the text files being scientific logs and alerts from Hyena, the enemy faction in this game. Beginning with the Monarch logs, you can find one for each of the following titans: Kong, Skullcrawlers, Warbats, Scylla, Abaddon, Plague Weavers, Skullspawn, Tiamat, Behemoth, and Lahamu. Despite featuring several titans not actually present in the game, such as Warbats or Scylla, Godzilla is absent. He's still referenced throughout the game by name though, so I'm not sure rights issues just prevented them from showing an image of him, or what? I don't know. I'm not reading each and every one of these out, but you can find them on Wikizilla if you're curious to read them yourself. That said, I did want to pick out some interesting talking points from them, such as the fact that Skullcrawlers apparently exist in a constant state of starvation, hence their bloodlust, with them even going as far as to dislocate their own jaws just to consume prey. The Easter Island heads were also apparently acting as ancient stone scarecrows to scare Scylla away in ancient times, and the fact that Behemoth's tusks are capable of producing seismic crashes that mimic thunder and can immobilize opponents. And most interestingly, the fact that Tiamat's vocal folds can mimic the sounds of other titans, as well as a human voice, which is kind of horrifying if thought about for too long, so moving swiftly along. The broadcasts are low in number and all pretty short, but they do offer some nice grounding for the story around you. Some of them are from news anchors describing chaos happening off-screen, others are intercepted radio conversations between survivors or Hyena agents. They don't offer anything too insane, but are a fun distraction to find when playing the game, and again, they help to ground you in the story. Finally are the text files, which, as mentioned above, are largely consistent of research logs from Hyena, a lot of them serving to establish more lore for whichever titan you'll be encountering in the section you find them in. Beyond the knowledge that hyenas will occasionally re-educate or otherwise persuade people to help them, there's not too much of note here beyond lore nut stuff. So, perfect for me. Kong Survivor Instinct is a strange game. One that had me by the throat in terms of excitement upon initially hearing its premise, only to slowly lose me over the course of playing it. Yet, despite that, I would hesitate before calling it a bad game, because it's not. Like I said earlier, this is a perfectly fine game to put on and mindlessly play if you're a fan of the Monsterverse, but that's just it. I'm not sure I could recommend this to anyone who isn't a fan of that very specific cinematic universe. It's built for fans, often to the detriment of itself. The game is gorgeous, and often feels like it was made to be cut up into best-of clip compilations on YouTube, with huge, ambitious, and cinematic moments when you encounter titans. But these moments are actually quite far and few between when actually playing. One of the biggest hype points for this game was the brand new Titan Abaddon, who was an insanely cool design and yet only appears in brief snippets in the middle chunk of the game. After this, Kong beats him up and presumably kills him off screen, and we just never see him again, and shift focus over to Tiamat for the final section, before she too is beaten up largely off screen before escaping with Lahamu, to show up again and, I guess, die in GXK. Although Lahamu is notably absent there, so, or RIP, I guess. It's not a game I see myself revisiting anytime soon, if ever, but it is one I'm glad I played, if for no other reason than to say that I did. It's got some good stuff under the surface here, and again, for an indie studio, it's a very impressive feat. AAA gaming has been on a notable decline for years now, especially from the larger studios, and with indie studios slowly stepping up to take their place, seeing them be trusted with such a big IP as this is interesting. It shows that instead of making a crappy live service Monsterverse game themselves, Legendary is willing to give the IP over to a smaller studio that actually cared to make something they could be proud of. and despite my many critiques of the game, I do think this is something to be proud of. The game is something I actually don't feel bad about paying money to experience, and that's incredibly rare with anything related to big franchises I care about nowadays, so it feels nice to support something that feels like it was made by fans, for fans, financially. Of course, who knows what's really going on. If the awful behind-the-scenes stories from something like Funko Fusion are anything to go by, smaller studios are still clearly perfectly capable of being awful and treating their employees like dirt. But until we actually hear any evidence of that with 7 levels, I'm choosing to remain optimistic. So yeah, in conclusion, if you are wondering if you should play this, then I think it's worth checking out if anything I've talked about interests you. The price is admittedly a bit steep for what you get, so maybe waiting for a sale might be smart, but if you're a Monsterverse fan, it's something at least worth checking out a Let's Play of. There currently isn't any available information on how well the game is sold. Steam numbers are pretty small, but we also don't know how much production costs for the game. So now, whether it was a success or not, for now, whether or not it was a success will remain a mystery. Although it probably wasn't some insane blowout success, even if it did do well, given the general lack of discussion surrounding the game. It has its flaws, but I do have hope it could pave the way for some more interesting experiences in the Monsterverse canon. There is a lot of potential, and I'd honestly be really interested in a gameplay sequel to this if it touched upon some of the points I mentioned earlier, notably movement tech and combat. But for now, only time will tell. That said, what were your thoughts on the game based on what you've seen, or have you even played it? I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts in the comments, as again, I have no clue what the general consensus on this game actually is. Also, please consider subscribing and leaving a like, as it really helps out and tells me you want more videos like this. I've got more stuff in the pipeline, so hopefully I'll be seeing you all again soon. But until then, ciao.